I believe we are recording and we are live.
You're good to go.
Ready? Okay, good evening and welcome to the Board of Education Ad-Hoc Inclusion and Educational Justice Committee meeting. Today is Wednesday, March 5th, 2025, and the time is 6 p.m. Joining me tonight is Board Member Howard White. Board Member Kara Nelson-Bakey is not able to attend. Also with us tonight is Deputy Superintendent Sandra Fayowis and Executive Director of Leadership Development, Allison Breedy Johnson, and Mr. Alden Burnham. Alden, your title is? You're on mute.
Alden, we are unable to hear you.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Let's try again, and if not, I can.
I just want to make sure I've got your title in there. Oh.
Alden is our data analyst.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead. Tell us your formal title.
Technically the Director of Educational Data Strategy.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. First on the agenda would be, I need to entertain a motion to approve the January 28th, 2025 minutes. Mr. White, if you would do that. Howard, do you want to make a motion for the minutes for January 28th? You're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute.
That's okay.
I motion the meeting from January 28th.
Thank you very much. So that motion is passed. The next item is public comments. I don't see anybody on unless I'm missing it.
No, we did not receive any via email either.
Okay, so next since there are no public comments, the next item on the agenda will be a presentation on gender representation metrics. Mr. Burnham, are you going to be doing that?
Yes.
I believe you can share and I can share also, Alden, so it's totally up to you, okay?
Okay. I think I have it up here.
If not, well, I have it up and ready. Do you want me to go and then you just tell me to advance?
Sure, that actually works just fine.
That's fine.
Because then I can see the notes and everything.
Yeah, no problem. I have it right here, and just please confirm for me that you guys see it just fine. Are you able to see it?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, awesome. So we just went over the agenda and now we are going to, do you want to talk about what you did and how this came about?
Yeah, absolutely. So this came about because during our last ad hoc inclusion meeting, we had some interesting feedback just around initiatives that we were doing as a district. And we had talked a little bit about how we were working on inclusion and enrollment gaps in our advanced math courses at our high schools, and we had a great presentation on that. And I believe it was Kara raised this question about the gender enrollment gap, and so we had done a lot of work around race, ethnicity, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But the question was, have we looked at gender and intersectionality gaps? The assumption being that these are also important issues to tackle, specifically when we think about, we have a STEM focus in some of our schools in the district. Do we have, gender equity when we think about enrollment in these courses? And that's what spurred this analysis. And off the top, I just want to say thanks for the opportunity to do this. I learned a tremendous amount doing this project, and I think that will be very useful for the district moving forward, because now I'm very well versed in how to do this kind of analysis, and I can look at any kind of equity gap you can pretty much imagine. So thanks for the opportunity. But if you go to the next slide here, thank you. Yeah, so the reason this is important is that a gender gap in participation or achievement would signal inequities that would contradict our district values and mission. So when we think back to what our mission statement is, what our strategic plan for the district is, equity is really at the heart of everything that we do. That's why this is a really valuable and important exercise to go through. And so that's where we started off. That's why this matters and why it's really important to understand. So the next slide here. Sandra. Yep. Okay. So this is the background. What is the gender gap? And part of the benefit of having a data scientist like me that works in-house is that you don't just dive into things because they're interesting or because some people, think they might matter, but we're actually going to like really dig into the research base behind this. So that's what I started with, was a pretty robust literature review. And that's where this idea came from. So in the past, you see this top bullet here. Boys outnumbered girls in advanced high school math classes. That's some research from 1991. This was a big thing that we heard about when we were all in school, and there was this new equity focus leading up until No Child Left Behind. There was a lot of research done about gender gaps in mathematics. Now, recent research over the last couple of decades has shown that that gap is essentially closed. There's very little evidence of any kind of nationwide or even in certain districts gender gap in mathematics enrollment. So that's encouraging, but this research is important, and these last three bullets here are about how that gender gap has manifested at the post-secondary level. So when you look at college STEM majors, for example, you're less likely to, if you walk into a college campus, you walk into a room, you're less likely to see girls enrolled in advanced engineering classes at the college level, for example. We also see a gap at the very highest end of achievement. So this was a study about math competitions. Like if you have a math club that goes to these nationwide competitive events, these kids are like 99th percentile math achievement. You're likely to see a gap there between the genders. Those tend to be very male dominated in enrollment, and also a gap in performance. So that's where the statistic that there's a 2-to-1 ratio of male to female students getting a perfect math SAT score nationwide. So at the very tails of this distribution in the 99th percentile, you see a gap in performance. So that's interesting to examine. And then lastly, the other reason this is really interesting is that there's an intersectionality component to this. So as we said when we started doing this research, the intersection of racial identity of Black and Brown, Black and Hispanic students with gender has led to some interesting kind of identity studies, and I'll talk a little bit about those as I move into them. But all this is to say that even though that the nationwide gender gap in math enrollment courses is pretty much closed, there's still some really important reasons to think that there's intersectional components or that there's performance attachments, and that especially as we lead into the post-secondary world, that this is important for our scholars. So if you go to the next slide, Sandra. This is some of the reasons that there might be a gender gap. And I thought it's important to visit these because when we talk about causality, it's really important that the statistics don't necessarily tell you the full story. So there's many different multifaceted reasons that we would expect a gender gap. Implicit bias is a major one that affects adults. It affects parents and parents' beliefs in their son's ability versus their daughter's ability. It affects teachers. There's a lot of good evidence about this. Teacher bias against white females when they go to make recommendations about their beliefs and their ability to succeed. And then the classroom context, sense of belonging is a really important one here. Like I mentioned, when girls, if you go into a college campus and you walk into an engineering class, it's likely to be male dominated. That's a reason to think that, girls might be less likely to take Algebra 1 if they walk in and they're the only girl. And that's why it's really important to understand those kind of contextual factors in addition to these other factors that I mentioned here about students' own propensity. So some students might experience stereotype threat. Another area of research, we have a very large body of research showing that that girls are affected by knowledge about stereotypes in their abilities in math, and that can affect their achievement. It can affect their enrollment, and then workforce preferences, prior achievement, and confidence all factor into this as well. There's a lot of really good research on this, and all of that led to this kind of exciting Norwalk-specific data work. So anyway, that's the background. If I can go into that more if anyone has questions, but that led me to the current area of study, which is in Norwalk Public Schools. Is there a gender gap in enrollment of advanced math courses? Do female students perform differently than male students in advanced math courses? And then lastly, do female students perform differently than male students on standardized assessments? And you'll see that the approach that I took, I could have run a bunch of regression analyses and bored you with statistics and p-values, but I chose to do a much more visual approach here because I thought that it would help tell the story a little better. And I can do any other kind of analysis that you're interested in, but I think that the upcoming visuals that I have prepared here will help kind of tell this story and hopefully lead to some more questions. Basically, the analysis that I did was I looked at this bottom bar if this math course sequence. You can take a bunch of different math classes when you're in high school, but in general, the highest achieving students in mathematics take this exact sequence. In the 7th grade, they're put in accelerated math. In the 8th grade, they take Algebra 1, which leads them to taking Algebra 2 or Honors Algebra 2 in the 9th grade, at which point they take Honors Geometry or Honors Pre-Calculus in 10th grade, at which point in 11th grade, they take Honors Pre-Calc, AP Calculus, or some IB course. We have a lot of IB curriculum going on in some of our schools now, and that leads them into the AP Calculus BC in the 12th grade. So that trajectory is what we call like advanced math. And what I basically did is I disaggregated the composition of those classes. So if you walked into that 10th grade honors geometry class, what percent of kids would be male and what percent of kids would be female, what percent, and then I looked at race ethnicity as well to kind of examine that intersectionality component, but that's basically the analysis that I did. So if you go to the next slide here, this will show you the gender gap in advanced math enrollment. So the blue dot is representing the percent of male students in these classes. The pink dot is representing the percent of female students. And what you see is this aligns with the national research. There is no significant gender disparity in the participation of high-level math courses. So you walk in to that grade 10 honors geometry class, it's 51% male and 49% female. That's not a significant gender gap. That's not anything worth really investing resources in. We actually see at the higher level, when you walk into these grade 11 advanced math or grade 12 advanced math, that there are more female students than male students. And that's a slight number. Again, it's like not even really worth explaining because it's not statistically significant. But anyway, that's the first piece of news. There's no gender gap in the enrollment in these math courses, and that's encouraging. If you go to the next slide here, Sandra, so this is kind of an interesting piece. Like we saw that enrollment of female students slightly increase over the course of grade 7 through grade 12. Now, the explanation for that, and one potential explanation for that, is that girls actually earn slightly higher grades in these advanced courses. So this plot here is showing you the exact same data, but instead of looking at the percent enrollment, it's looking at the average GPA. So in other words, what's the average grade that a male student or a female student earns in these classes? So in grade 7 accelerated math, you'll see the average GPA is like a 3.5, which is like, what is that? Like an A minus, B plus area. So the average grade in those classes, and you'll see that the blue dot and the pink dot are extremely close together. As you get into these higher level courses, the AP, it's actually possible to get better than an A average. And most students, for example, in grade 11 honors pre-calculus do get higher grades in those courses. But again, you'll see that these pink dots are actually slightly to the right of the blue dots. So in other words, girls are outperforming boys. And one potential explanation for that, you'll see this research here, that female students actually outperform male students on these non-cognitive measures that factor into grading. We know factor into grading. Things like paying attention in class, working well with others, or staying organized, seeking help. There's lots of other, like, basically non-cognitive, non-academic skills that factor into this grade, and girls tend to outperform boys on those, which is one potential explanation of why they're getting better grades and therefore making up more of the enrollment. So that's an interesting piece there. The next slide here will tell you about the course composition. So this is what the district would look like if everyone in Norwalk Public Schools was compressed into a 30-student classroom. So if you took all 11,500 students, divided them into their percent makeup, this is what it would look like. So there's basically no gap in gender, so you're going to see equal numbers of male and female students. What you'll notice here is that there's a lot of Hispanic students and a lot of, basically it's Hispanic students, then white students, then Black students in terms of the population representation here in this classroom. But there's no big gender gap in the overall enrollment. That makes sense. But you do see large gaps based on race, ethnicity, and most of the students are Hispanic, followed by white. So you'd see, for example, 5 white students in a class of 30. So that's important to note there. And if you go to the next slide here, Sandra, this is what the advanced math course composition is. So this is kind of interesting that the green students, which would make up the white students here, there's quite a few more of those. So in the advanced math courses, you actually see 11 more white students than you would expect based on their district enrollment. And correspondingly, you see quite a bit fewer Hispanic students. You see about 5 fewer Hispanic students than you would expect based on enrollment. And what you'll notice, these male and female emojis here are actually coded based on their actual percent enrollment. So it's like a 50-50 split in terms of the male and female students within each race ethnicity group, but the race ethnicity groups are like drastically differently represented if you walk into this classroom versus if you walked into a hypothetical average classroom based on the consistency. So this kind of analysis is very useful when you're examining like what does a classroom actually look like and what would we expect it to look like? They've done different kinds of analyses with this. If you look at like, interestingly, this is a sidebar, but if you look at like the United States racial composition, the city that actually best makes up the United States is New Haven, Connecticut, and the surrounding areas. This is a similar kind of analysis of like demographically, what classroom would best represent Norwalk Public Schools as a whole. And what we're learning is advanced math doesn't do that very well. And the racial gaps in enrollment are a major reason for that. If you go to the next slide here, Sandra. Yeah, so what you'll see here is the gender gap in enrollment and the intersection with race. All of these graphs are basically looking at the percent of enrollment in these classrooms relative to the hypothetical enrollment that you would expect based on the district enrollment. So very similar to the last 2 graphs I showed, they're just a little bit more traditional graphs instead of pictograms. So what you're seeing is that white students are way overrepresented regardless of gender. The blue and pink bars are very close together, but they're very far apart from Black and Hispanic, and really Hispanic and Latino students are far underrepresented in these classes compared to what you'd expect based on their district enrollment. And that holds true from grade 7 through grade 12, but you definitely see junior and senior Hispanic male students are the ones that are least well represented in these classes. And you see that white male students are the ones that are more overly represented based on their district enrollment in these classes. So that's an important takeaway, just thinking about enrollment there. Any question? I can stop there for questions. There's other stuff that I want to talk about with performance. Like I said, I also looked at performance of students, but I can take questions about enrollment as well.
So that slide that we just looked at, so that is representative of MPS, right? This one here.
Yeah, so what that's showing is the percent difference between enrollment in these classes compared to Norwalk Public Schools. So if the bar was 0, that would mean they're perfectly well represented. So for example, in grade 8 Algebra 1, Black students are pretty much represented exactly as much as you'd think. They're about 13% of Norwalk public schools is Black students, and the percent of students that are in Algebra 1 in grade 8 is like 12.8%. It's like very, very close. So that bar is very small. But you see for Hispanic and Latino, it's much lower. It's like minus 10%. There's about 10% fewer students than you'd expect.
Now, relative to the Latino students, are those students represented here, are they MLL students? And if they are, does the language barrier contribute to the lack of representation in those kinds of classes?
That's certainly an explanation. That not all of our Hispanic students are MLL students, but many of them are, and about one in 5 Norwalk Public School students is a multilingual learner. We have a very large and growing population of students, and that could certainly factor in that. But the way that students qualify for these classes, right, is that they have to combine their scores. That's something that I'll talk a little bit about later. But they combine their test scores with the grade data, with the teacher recommendation, and if students don't have the language skills to be able to access
can't do it.
then that's going to certainly impact their enrollment, and that's certainly a possible explanation.
Yeah, and that's why I was asking the question, because I mean, if you're not proficient in the language, if you are a Latin student who happens to be MLL, then it's going to be difficult for you to be able to do that class or read any book for that matter. To get material, it's going to be challenging. Thank you. Howard, do you have any questions? Did you want to add something or comments?
I think because he talked about, I think he's going to go into it, because I was going to ask about the enrollment, that part of it. So, and he's, so I guess he's going to go further into that. So that was going to be my question. So I'll wait on that.
Great. Yeah. So I'll talk about performance on grades next. And then the last thing I'll talk about is performance on standardized tests, because they actually are slightly different. This is one other thing that I wanted to add as a little bit of context. And like I was saying, so one of the reasons that girls are better enrolled in these higher level classes is because their grades are better. And there's a lot of non-cognitive things that go into grades. So when I spoke about this with Carol Wilcher-Toth, who's our head of counseling, she actually recommended looking at suspensions as a measure of behavior. Since students who are suspended likely potentially have some other kinds of reasons that their behavior could be influencing their enrollment in these courses. That is exactly what I found in the data. So obviously students that have suspensions, you would expect there'd be fewer of those students enrolled in these high level math classes. So that is true. Like there's probably some correlation between those students' behavior and their aptitude for this higher level math. But what we found is that is not equally distributed. So in other words, Asian students that are suspended, Asian students with suspensions are actually overrepresented in these courses relative to what you'd expect. Whereas if you look at Black or Hispanic, particularly male students, based on the proportion of Black and Hispanic male students in the district that have been suspended, you would expect way more of those students to be enrolled in these higher level math courses. And that could potentially speak to these kinds of non-cognitive skills influencing teachers' decision-making or teachers' recommendations for these higher level math courses. So that's really, really crucial to understand. One thing that we're certainly working on when we're thinking about grading for equity is that the only reason that a student shouldn't be taking Algebra 1 in the 8th grade is if they are not capable of taking Algebra 1 in the 8th grade. And getting some kind of suspension or behavior incident is certainly something that can be managed by teachers. It doesn't speak to their ability to do higher level math. And that's one thing that we're really focusing on is from an equity perspective, any student that can achieve is given the opportunity to achieve. So interesting little sidebar there. The next slide, though, is going to talk a little bit more about performance. So this is success rate, which is basically the rate at which students pass the class. Now, for higher level math courses, you'll see most of these are 98% of the kids are passing these courses, but it's not 100%. So this is why we look at success rate as an important metric. So for male and female students, the blue dot and pink dots on the left, you'll see that they're pretty similar. Male students tend to pass Algebra 1 in the 8th grade at a slightly higher rate, but female students tend to pass Algebra 2 at a slightly higher rate. These differences aren't significant. What is significant is the intersectionality component. So the graph on the right has all of these different dots. And what it's showing is the closed circles are male students and the open circles are female students. And then they're color coded based on race ethnicity. So what it's showing, for example, the dark red dots are representing Hispanic or Latino male students. And those are the students that are actually succeeding. They're passing these courses at the lowest rate. And on the other hand, you'll see that these blue open circles, which are representing white female students, are passing these courses at the highest rate. So there are significant gaps when you look at that. But again, it's an intersectionality thing. It's not a gender thing. And it's primarily driven by the fact that there are race and ethnicity gaps in success rate in these courses. So that's the first metric I looked at. The second one is about GPA. So again, looking at the same kind of graph that I showed at the beginning about the average grade that a student achieves in these courses. And what I noted is that white and Asian students are consistently earning higher grades in these advanced math courses than Black and Hispanic students. And that's what you see in the graph here. The dark red circle is lower. It's closer to 3. So Hispanic male students are achieving on average a B in these courses. And then you'll see that the blue closed circle and the green closed circle, which represent white male students and Asian male students, are achieving like a better than a 4 in the AP classes. They're achieving A's. So there's almost a full grade point gap there that's significant, right? When you're thinking about statistical meaning, like that's a significant gap in the grades that they achieve. And the interesting note is that white female students have the highest grades, but that's the opposite of what we see on SAT score. So the next couple of slides, I'll talk about SBAC, PSAT and SAT score. But just hold that for a second. Like, remember that girls are achieving the highest grades, white girls are achieving the highest grades, but that's not necessarily happening when we get to the SAT data. So first piece of data here from performance-based metrics is the Smarter Balanced Assessment, which students take in the 7th grade and the 8th grade. On the students that are in grade 7 accelerated math and the students that are in grade 8 algebra 1, there's like zero gap whatsoever in performance between male and female students. That's great. They're both doing awesome when they go and take the SBAC. There is a race ethnicity gap, but it tends to be pretty small. You'll see that most of the dots in this graph on the right are pretty closely clustered together. Like, you do see that white male students tend to perform pretty well, that Asian male students tend to perform pretty well, but like, again, statistically speaking, not a big gap there when it comes to the SBAC results. But when it comes to PSAT results, as we get into the higher level courses, so this is for students that are taking the PSAT in 9th grade or the PSAT in 10th grade, this is where you start to see some more interesting gaps emerge. The gender gap is pretty small in 9th and 10th grade, but it does grow to something that we consider significant in the 12th grade. Male students are outperforming female students on the SAT in 12th grade when they're both in this exact same class. So again, that's interesting. Girls are getting better grades, but they're scoring lower on the SAT in that AP calculus class in the 12th grade. And you see the same thing when you look at the PSAT data. At the lower levels, their grades are much closer together. And again, there's this intersectionality component that you're seeing. Black and Hispanic girls, the open circles, the open red circle and the open brown circle there, are tending to be further to the left than white girls, Asian girls, white males, and Asian male students are further to the right. So that gap, you can see that the trend is, as you move down, as you get into these more advanced courses, that gap tends to expand. So there is a clear evidence here of an intersectionality gap when it comes to performance on standardized tests. Again, interestingly, that's not the same trend that we saw when it came to grades or enrollment. So that's a potentially interesting thing for us to examine is the rigor that's happening in these courses being equally distributed? Why are these students getting left behind? Why are they not performing as well when it comes to actually taking these large standardized tests? So that's important for us to dig into. These are the big takeaways. So yeah, the gaps in enrollment and performance are larger for race ethnicity groups than they are for gender. It was still important for us to dig into this and to recognize the intersectionality component. Secondly, that girls are outperforming boys when it comes to grades, but that's not transferring to performance on the PSAT or the SAT at higher levels, higher grade levels. And lastly, that Black and Hispanic girls tend to have the lowest SAT scores despite outperforming Black and Hispanic boys in the lower grade levels. So again, like this intersectionality component really speaks to the need to maintain strong rigor for all of our students in these higher level courses and make sure that they're getting supported and that they can perform at the level at which we know they can because they're in these higher level courses. So that's kind of the big takeaways from this. And I can answer any more questions or if there's follow-up research or studies or examinations analysis that you want me to do, I'm more than happy to do that as well.
I'm okay. Howard, you okay? Did you have any questions at this point?
No, I'm good. I like what I'm hearing. I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Vernon.
Thank you, Alden.
Yeah, and Sandra, I don't know if you want to talk about the next slide is about kind of what we're doing about this and how
but you can, but go ahead. I just wanted to make sure nobody had questions yet. No, go ahead.
Yeah, so the kind of 4 big things that we're doing right now. The first one is we had this grading for equity conversation that's been ongoing in the district. Since we just had this conversation about how girls tend to have higher grades but lower SAT scores. That's what Feldman's grading for equity is all about. The non-cognitive skills that are entering these classroom discussions that are particularly pernicious for our students that have low socioeconomic status and those non-cognitive skills tend to impact their ability to earn high grades when it has nothing to do with their ability to learn or to demonstrate their knowledge. So that's what Grading for Equity is about. We've had a lot of district conversations about that. We've made some progress and we've had some setbacks as well, but those conversations have been ongoing. Just yesterday, we had Paul Forbes present to principals, and then today as well to the assistant principals on internal bias, which is some of the things that were driving both the race ethnicity gaps that we see, the opportunity gaps, as well as the gender gaps. So those conversations have been going on with central office over the last year and with principals, APs. He's working with the equity coaches later as well. So a lot of great work being done there. And then the data part, which is the part that I'm most connected with, Dr. Eddie Fergus has been doing a lot of awesome work for the last couple of years now after the equity audit that we had that he conducted with researchers from Temple University. So using data to monitor disparities in enrollment, that's been ongoing, and we've seen some really good progress there that I'm sure I'll be sharing at some point about enrollment in these courses for Black and Hispanic students. And then lastly, like the thing that I've been really focusing on is streamlining articulation. So as I was saying, the process by which students get recommended for these higher level courses is a data process. It's one that where teachers are making decisions, but we want those decisions to be informed by as many data points as possible to know if students are prepared for Algebra 1. And so some things that I've been working on since I conglomerate all of this data into dashboards for our educators is making sure that we're using not just the most recent 2 or 3 NWEA tests, but as many tests as we have for that student, and making sure that we're not just using one smarter balance score to make a decision about this, but rather having at least 2 of them to make sure that we're not letting any students slip through the cracks that have demonstrated aptitude for these higher level math courses. Because again, if we have the capacity to expand this, we can base it on cognition, we can base it on actual learning and performance on benchmark assessments. That's what we should be using to make these determinations, not things like suspension or how the teacher's feeling about that student. It should really be fundamentally rooted in data and rooted in what we know about their ability to perform in these higher level math courses. So that's the part that I work on, but lots of other great equity work being done in the district as well.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I would just add on to what Alden was just talking about, which will be mentioned in the curriculum committee meeting, is that we recognize that literacy also plays a key role in ensuring that students are excelling, and when they get to the point of high school, that they're able to thrive in these higher level courses, which they're measured by the SATs and AP exams and things of that nature. We have worked with our partner TNTP to develop a K through 12 literacy vision. And as part of that vision, really focusing on the foundational skills in elementary schools so that children are learning how to read and meeting those benchmarks in 3rd grade, and really taking a look at ensuring that our students are really being exposed to complex text and really using reading as a way of building knowledge, as well as using evidence-based practices. And like I said, there'll be more detail about that in the curriculum committee meeting, but that is something that we are working on as a district that very closely aligns to some of the next steps that Alden was talking about, and will certainly have an impact.
Yeah, and I think what we are trying to show through this committee is just how all of these things work together. So our work around discipline obviously impacts, how students get recommended for some of these higher level courses. The grading for equity work, which we want to update you that it's posted and we're waiting for 16 teachers. It's going to be advertised to actually engage in an action research project. And then all the work that we're doing really should be working together to try to eliminate some of these gaps, because the gaps, as you could see, we're doing much better at getting students up until 8th grade, 9th grade. Those gaps in performances aren't as large as they are once they start to get into those older grades. So there's a lot that happens with what Alden said. And so it's hard to actually pinpoint a cause because so many things intersect that are leading students to not succeeding in the same way. But we've been able to make some good gains, definitely in the 8th grade, in targeting access to math and making sure that students are actually performing well in those courses, and that the teachers are bringing them to the rigor. The high school is something else that we have to look at to make sure the students are supported and that staff is supported also in making sure that that level of rigor is maintained. But if you don't have any questions, we just have a couple of
Yeah.
more updates and
Yeah.
then we're done. Allison, do you have questions, Sherry?
No, I was just going to say that, at least we can say that the administration, the district is doing things to try to address these issues because they've been here with us for quite some time. And so these students are not just being written off. So that's good to know that we are doing work to try to figure this all out. At the same time, I mean, clearly there are some subjective things that are really hard
Yeah,
to weed out. I know we're doing a lot of bias training, working with Dr.
yeah,
Fergus with our staff, but um, there, I would imagine that's going to continue to be a challenge when you're dealing with
yeah.
folks' own subjectivity in terms of, how they're managing students and identifying them for these classes. But the good thing is we did just approve a policy, right, to enhance how students are identified for higher level classes.
And that's the great thing. The great thing is the combination of these technical things that
Right,
we could do to
right,
force the system.
right,
And then the other wonderful thing is that we can ask questions about
right.
data and we can actually give you a response, which is
Mm-hmm,
something that in the past didn't exist. So
mm-hmm,
the data speaks for
mm-hmm.
itself,
Right, it
and I
does.
think when you have data and you could
Right.
point to these gaps and you can say something like, how can girls be getting better grades,
Mm-hmm,
but then not be performing as well on a standardized
right.
exam?
It's very
That's a
interesting.
question, right?
Right.
That is a real question. We have the data to back it up. And
Right.
that's the great thing about when Alden takes on these
Mm-hmm,
projects. It's
mm-hmm.
that like once it's in front of you,
Right.
you're forced to have to look at what is causing,
What's
what is
going
the
on?
root cause. Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I am ready to.
Allison, do you want to just talk about the mid-year data or anything
Yeah,
you
just
wanted to highlight? Mhm.
Yeah, just a quick, update because we've been talking a lot about, and Alden shared, some data around PSAT and SAT. And I just wanted to share, so with Norwalk High, we are piloting a program to better monitor student progress throughout the school year in relation to PSAT and SAT, with a company called Horizons. And so, what happened at the mid-year point, Norwalk High administered an assessment that mirrors the PSAT SAT exam, that would give us data on how students are progressing before they actually take their SAT exam in the spring. Actually, it's like April 3rd, and the PSAT at the end of this month. And so the preliminary data is showing significant growth. So, in terms of their school improvement plan goal, at the mid-year point, they have exceeded their goal. And in terms of growth, um, more than 50% of the students scored 50 points or higher than they did on the benchmark assessment in the fall during the mid-year. And in math, 44% of the students, high need students, showed growth of 50 points or more at the mid-year. So, that in such a short period of time, um, in which the school enacted their action plan, found out about their designation, put into place their action plan, and began to really focus on embedding some of these skills into daily instruction. Within a few short months, we're already seeing growth, which is which is exciting. Brian McMahon, another one of our schools that serves high populations of Black and Brown students, while they're not using the same Horizons assessment, they are using the MAP assessment this year for ELA and math, and they too, based on implementing this IB, moving in the direction of implementing IB for all, as well as focusing on SAT as well, has shown significant growth at the mid-year in terms of their school improvement plan. And they too have exceeded their goal for the year at the midpoint of the year in both ELA and math.
Does that mean, when you say Norwalk High, does that mean P-TECH as well? Or
No,
just Norwalk High, right?
just Norwalk High.
Okay, just Norwalk. And the same with McMahon, it's not CGS.
That's
it's
Brian
just...
McMahon, yes. So the two comprehensive high schools.
And the two large comprehensive high schools have the largest concentration of Black and Brown students. And so there's been a lot of focus on moving those high need students, because if whatever you're doing that will move those high need students will move everyone. If you can move the students that are actually the most disproportionately represented in all this other data, everybody benefits. With that said, we're happy to hear feedback. We're happy to close if you're ready to close, but any additional questions, we're here for the team.
No, I don't have any questions, but I just want to say that I congratulate you guys on the great work that you're doing. I'm excited to see where this is going to take us. I think it's always in the beginning going to be a challenge. Everything that we do and anything that comes in new, there's always those negative outsiders that come in and critique it from a negative standpoint, even some teachers, to be honest with you. However, I just am excited about it. I think you guys did a hell of a job. Continue to keep up the good work, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this all operates.
Thank you so much. We're staying the course, so.
Sounds good. A lot of work has been done, a lot of improvement. So if there's nothing else, I'm ready to close out. I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Howard.
I second that.
Thank you, Mr. White. And so that means our meeting is adjourned at 6:42 p.m. Thank you, everyone, for all of your hard work and your time. And have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you.
Bye, guys.